Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for taking the time and being considerate and wanting to learn something new. Today, I'm going to be talking about connecting generations because September is Intergenerational Month. And hello, I am prevention educator Ruth Del Pino. So I always start my presentations with a couple of things, and this is one of them. First thing is, who am I? Because you're receiving information from someone. We want to make sure you're receiving information from someone you deem as a legitimate source. So hello, my name is Ruth Del Pino. I'm a prevention educator at the Mercer Council on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction. I'm the Mercer County Grant Program Coordinator. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Global Studies, Political Science, and American Studies. I'm certified to teach English as a foreign language, life skills training, and leadership. So thank you for that. So I always start my presentation with this too, just because we want to have a baseline level of understanding before we jump into anything. First thing is, if there's information in here that scares you, it's not meant to do that. This is to inform you. This is also not a parenting class. You are the best parent for your child. You know them the best. You've probably known them longer than they've known themselves. But I would also say that this is not a parenting class in general, because this is meant for people who interact with youth, who want to understand youth, whom they have someone in their lives that is a youth that they have questions for or want to help in some way. Also, my perspective is shaped by my approach and my learning experiences, meaning that anything I get as a prevention educator, anything I learn as a prevention educator, any resource that I deem that is really good knowledge to give access to, I put in presentations and I give access for you to look at those resources. Also, this is evidence informed and some evidence based, meaning that it's essentially that this is an evidence-informed presentation. Everything that I present is founded in empirical evidence, but it is also something that is my interpretation of that evidence. So I do pick things that I think would be relevant to the situation, be relevant to the presentation, and also understand that this is evidence-based in that it takes from the presentations and the resources and the programs that the Mercer Council has, such as Too Good for Drugs, footprints, and things of that sort. Now, also, while we're doing this, I want everyone to sort of understand that if you're on the YouTube channel while you're viewing this, there are going to be resources in the description below so that you can look through them to understand what that looks like. And also to go through them with me as we talk about these resources. Now, first thing is, while we're talking about Intergenerational Month, we want to know what generation means. And it's sort of defined as this. And it can be defined as a lot of different things, but it is defined as a group of people born around the same time and raised around the same place. People in this birth cohort exhibit similar characteristics, preferences, and values over their lifetimes. Now, this is according to the dictionary, Webster's dictionary. But what we can say too is that generation does not necessarily mean that everyone in that generation has the same things that they think. And we want to make that very clear that when we're talking about generations, we're talking about what could mean that that generation having a certain set of values and a certain set of experiences. So, for example, I know for millennials, 9/11 is coming up, and that is something that has shaped the millennial experience in America. So that was something that we all looked at, but also to understand that generations, not everyone is the same in that everyone internalizes information differently. Everyone looks at information and understands that it can be interpreted differently, that it can be viewed differently, that it can be used in different contexts. Now, while we're looking at this too, because we're talking about intergenerationalism, what are generational differences? And this is something that we need to define in order to kind of go forward with our presentation, really. But what are generational differences? And I have a definition here. There appear to be differences in values, beliefs, and opinions between different generations of people. While some believe strongly in differences, others believe they are myths. So this is something to keep in mind. But to understand too, it is a generational gap or a generational gap difference of opinions between one generation and another regarding beliefs, politics, or values. Now, as we look through this, we can understand that if people are raised a certain way, that they basically raise their children to have the same values as them because they deem those the best to teach. So, for example, if people value money as they're growing up, they may want to incorporate that into their lifestyle, to search for money, to make money, to have a better life for themselves and the people around them. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that one generation holds a specific value over another. It's that the socialization among people of that age definitely affects the way that people interact with their environment, such as this generation for the COVID situation that we have now. So we're going to be moving on and moving forward. Now, we can sort of talk about the different things that have been going on, and we sort of want to understand that things are different now. And I want to make it clear that when we talk about back in my day, or when we say when I was your age, you can definitely use that to relate to another person. And I have alluded to this before, but to understand that things are different now. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean everything, but it can mean a lot of things. So when we say things are different now, we want to make sure that we are saying it in a way that honors the situation that, or the person that you're talking to. So when we'd say to children, oh, back in my day, we had to walk 7 miles to school, which is something my baby boomer parents used to say. And I just find it interesting that they use that sort of language. And yes, some of it could very well be true. Some of it could very well be that there was a harder life before us, or an easier life after us, or even a harder life after us. But it is to acknowledge every part of that situation and honor every part of that situation. So we're going to be looking here just for a second, because I think that these are the things that sort of the people of today are facing and have faced. Bullying. Cyberbullying is a huge part of sort of the dogma that exists in the United States, especially, but all over the world, because of the access to social media and the access to different things that people have. We're going to be talking about innovation on the next slide, so I don't want to get too much into that. But we're talking about cyberbullying and whether or not people can do something about this and their exposure to it. So this is a great resource, and there are actually quite a few facts about cyberbullying that I think we could really use to move forward in this presentation. So here it talks about this generation in particular. About 37% of young people between ages 12 and 17 have been bullied online. 30% have had it happen more than once. 95% of the teens in the United States are online, and the vast majority have access to the internet on their mobile device. 23% of students reported they've said or done something mean or cruel to another person online. 27% reported they've experienced the same from someone else. Now, also, there are some more striking statistics here that say about half of the LGBTQIA+ students experience online harassment, a rate higher than the average. 15% of teen girls experience at least 4 different kinds of abusive online behaviors, compared to 6% of boys. So this is just definitely a lot of information. I don't want to throw too many numbers out there for you, but this is a great resource to understand the socialization of today and what this generation is going through. Also, the other thing too is that it's not necessarily something that we are seeing, but it could mean that there is a threat to a pornography addiction in this day and age, because of the amount of pornography that is readily available and free in the United States. So we're just going to look at this very quickly. That porn addiction is now threatening an entire generation, and this was a very interesting article to read through. I don't want to read through it too much because it is a lot of nuance, but while we are talking about this, while we are understanding this, it's that porn addiction in itself. And to reiterate, is that the generation today really looks at the creation of fantasies, the creation of lifestyles, the creation of what could be or what should be. And while we look through this, that is something to keep in mind, that there is a sort of rhetoric of fantasy. There is a sort of rhetoric of what if or can I in the future. So they're very future minded. Also, nudity is definitely a big part of today, but it's definitely been a big part of a lot of different American socialization. Gaming addiction is something that is happening in the United States. It doesn't happen often, but this is through the American Addiction Center, and it talks about gaming addiction. And there are definitely things that we could talk about here. There are symptoms here and warning signs to look through. And it's not common among this generation, but it is more common among this generation than it was the previous one. So as we go through that, and also just movies are different. Socialization of movies is definitely different. The values of today reflect the plot points in movies. So we want to keep that in mind as we move forward as well. Now, innovation is definitely something that we are looking at here. And while we are looking at it, we want to look at social media, but technology in general, because innovation is something that happens all the time in a lot of aspects, in almost every aspect. So innovation is, how has technology affected human life? Now, ultimately, technology has had a positive effect on human life, because otherwise, why would we be doing what we're doing? Why would we have the things that we have? Now, the positive impacts can range, right? But the mechanization of agriculture, improvement of transportation, improvement of communication, improving education and learning experiences, those sorts of things. Now, when we have the negative parts of the impact of technology, we can say a wide range of things, but really it's that while we have a negative impact, it's understanding that we may lose connectedness with people. We may have a prioritization over the innovation or the technology that we have hands on. It also means that more people are working more hours, which means they have less time for family because of the way that things are in certain areas of the world. So there are a lot of different ways to say about that. And also, I said before, and I had alluded to before, but this is something that we want to talk about, is that a lot of the time when people say back in my day, and I just sort of wanted to talk about this quickly because I feel, one, it's necessary to bring up, but two, there are a lot of different ways that we can talk about this, right? So when we say back in my day, or when we say, when I was your age, now, there are a lot of different ways that we can approach this. Are we approaching it from a way of connecting with that person? Are we approaching it in a way of disenfranchising the experience of that person? Are we negating that person's experience in general? So we want to be careful of the language that we use when we're interacting with youth, when we're saying things like this. Now, I've heard a lot of back in my day scenarios, and me and my parents find it funny because the societal differences that we have are just kind of funny to us, but that doesn't mean it's always a friendly conversation, but we want to aim for it to be. And I think that the best takeaway that we can have for especially a sentiment like this is understanding that I was never 14 and had a cell phone in this day and age. I was never 14 and had to do with social media access the same way we have today, what the teenagers have today. So while we're looking through this, we want to understand that back in my day is only as good as connecting to the person to use it for empathy purposes. Because if we say it any other way, it won't be digested and it'll really fall on ears that are not listening, right? Also, to understand that cell phones look very different these days. Cell phones have Wi-Fi access, cell phones have social media. Cell phones are definitely given free in terms of all the access that they can have to different parts of the world. They have so much on that device. And I know for me, internet on a phone was something that everyone wanted, but it wasn't anything that anyone had. And now we have unlimited data plans, we have Wi-Fi, we have so many aspects to that make it so easy for people to stay connected with the things around them. So we just want to make sure that we are keeping that in mind while we move forward. Now, if we're sort of talking about the back in my day sentiment, we're going to move forward with this. And I don't know if anybody has sort of felt the toxic positivity culture of our nation, and that it can be something that affects a lot of people, affects older people that they don't want to talk about it. But in general, when we have toxic positivity, and it is something that I think could be on the reversal, and we're working towards that. But there was a sentiment to say, oh, just smile. When you smile, it takes more bones to frown than it does to smile. And yes, we're right, but there are other parts to that too. So if we're honoring people's experiences, we really want to talk about mental health disorders. Now, why was it affected? Why do we have mental health disorders in the first place? There are many different reasons for this: genetics, situation, socioeconomic status, adverse childhood experiences, etc. Right? But there are quite a few studies here, and we want to understand why it plays such an important role and how we interact with people of different generations. So I'm going to be talking about the baby boomer generation just for a second, because that is the generation that seems to be the most far removed from the generation that is living today, Gen Z. So it is estimated, and this is through the UK, BUPA UK numbers, and this was through a study that was done for the purposes of collecting mental health disorder data. But in an intergenerational study, as they were talking about, baby boomers age 55 and older were shown to be the most likely age group to delay or avoid seeking medical help for symptoms associated with mental ill health. This is despite the fact that 2/3 of this age group suffer from symptoms associated with mental ill health, including anxiousness, continuous low mood, feelings of hopelessness, and insomnia. Now, 1 in 4 tell no one about these symptoms, with fewer baby boomers confiding in a partner or a friend about these symptoms, and half of that actually consulting a doctor with those symptoms. Now, this can be interesting for a lot of reasons, and we want to understand this because this is how we are sort of aiming to connect between one generation versus another, while we're sort of understanding the socialization of each generation to make sure that we can learn from that and honor those experiences. Now, I know for a fact my parents were much more of the keep it in the family, sweep it under the rug type people, and there definitely was a stigma to talking about, oh, there's sort of this joke online that I see a lot that says, you have older baby boomers that are saying, oh, she's in therapy, and they just sort of whisper the therapy part. But then you have millennials or Gen Zers, being boisterous and entering the room and saying, hey, me and my therapist, we're talking about this today. So it's understanding that there is definitely a sentiment between getting help and seeking that help and maintaining that resource and that help in general. So when we're talking about this too, it's to understand that older generations have been sort of said, like, mental health is not something you talk about. And it is something that we are getting better at talking about in the spaces that we're talking about it in. But not everyone is comfortable talking about it. And as those numbers have shown from the UK, those numbers are not that much different from the United States. And actually, they're almost identical. So there also was another intergenerational study, according to Western Governors University, that talked about Generation Z. And the present day does look interesting because we want to talk about this for a second and ask, is it more complicated? Well, it can depend on who you ask, right? In that it is more complicated in that people are more plugged in, people have more access to social media, people have many different avenues, people have other people that they can confide in, people have other resources of information. So there's a lot coming at a person that can make them feel overwhelmed. There's a lot of situations that people can sit in and be a part of that helps them exacerbate their mental health disorder, or can help mitigate some of those risk factors for a mental health disorder or substance use disorder for that matter. But also we can understand that the way that people and the way that older generations look at mental health disorder can sort of be the same way people look at substance use disorders, right? So when they say, oh, let's just keep it in the family, let's just get him help within our family, let's just make sure that we're the support system for that family, it's understanding that sometimes we are not the best people for that, and getting help for that person is the only way that can help them truly flourish into their future and having a better life. Now, with present day in general, with this study done by Western Governors University, only 45% of Generation Z individuals say their mental health is good or excellent. And I'm going to read some numbers here, so bear with me. That is 11% lower than the next closest generation, millennials, that were born between 1981 and 1996. In 2017, the latest year for which federal data is available, found that 1 in 8 Americans aged 12 to 25, so this is Gen Z, experienced a major depressive episode. Generation Z is the most depressed generation. However, this generation is most likely to seek help for treatments for anxiety, depression, and counseling, depression through counseling and therapy. Now, 37% of Gen Zers say that they received help from a psychologist or other mental health expert, which is more than any other previous generation, which is great. So if you have the 37% of that 45, that is a great majority. That is something that is so worth acknowledging, and that if these people are going to therapy to get that help, that means that they are recognizing and honoring their experiences and seeking help for them. Now, that can also mean that there is something to learn from younger people, that if they have things that they need help for, then we can help connect that to the older generation. That if there is such a low rate of people who are older getting help for their mental health or substance use disorder, then that means that they can learn from people who seek help who are younger for their mental health or substance use disorder. So we're going to be moving on and moving forward. I do want to talk about intergenerational trauma, and I know that this is something that I talk about a lot. It does relate to adverse childhood experiences, and it is definitely something that originates in that way. The intergenerational trauma can be one of the biggest sources of adverse childhood experiences. But just to understand that adverse childhood experiences, in case anybody doesn't know who has never come to one of these before, adverse childhood experiences are experiences that happen when you are young during your formative years that affect how you function on your day-to-day and interact with your life later on. There may be things that you carry with you. There may be parts of your brain that are permanently changed, or the pathways due to an experience. So we want to make sure that we are honoring that experience, and we are honoring those experiences to talk about intergenerational trauma, because in the United States, there is intergenerational trauma in a lot of populations. Now, I'm going to be talking about this intergenerational trauma in particular, and it is a video from Australia, of all places. And I want to talk about Australia for a second, because Australia has a population that are called Aboriginal. Now, these Aboriginal populations were the natives that had stayed in this area. Now, what we find interesting and what we want to understand is that Aboriginal experiences and Aboriginal culture is much more appreciated in places like Australia and New Zealand, but it is not necessarily something that has always been honored. So up until this point, there have been areas where there needs growth. So we can sort of use this as a reference to my First Nation substance use disorders, myths and realities presentation, where I talked a lot about Native Americans experiencing intergenerational trauma. There were some numbers that I found disturbing, and some numbers that I'm just going to share for a second, that 40% of people on reservations who are on reservation life have been diagnosed with an alcohol use disorder or recognize their alcohol use disorder. The rate of diabetes is almost 3 times the national average. The life expectancy of someone on a reservation is about 50 years old. The violence, the sexual assaults, all of those sorts of hard experiences exist more readily on these reservations due to the intergenerational trauma that people experience and that have been experiencing on an everyday basis. Now, this is a great video, and I just want to honor this and sort of just have it speak for itself, because they could say things better than I can. So, and this is a bit of a spiritual experience, so let's just watch it together and appreciate
the story of our communities, people and nation starts a long, long time ago. More than 60,000 years, in fact. This was when our culture and our law first started to thrive. We knew who we were and where we belonged. We took care of each other, our land and our waters. We ate food that made us healthy, lived on country and abided by our laws and song lines. Our families, our children were happy, with strong minds and hearts, because they were where they belonged. But then, everything changed.
Colonization came, bringing wars, disease, famine, violence, and the destruction and violation of our cultural laws, sacred sites, families, and communities.
We were denied our knowledge, language, ceremonies, and identity. The very things that tell us who we are and where we belong. And our connections with each other and the land grew weak.
And then, our children were taken from us. They had their names changed and their identities stripped away. They were told that Aboriginal people were bad. Worse still, they were told that their parents and grandparents did not want them.
For years this happened, and those children became known as the stolen generations.
Our children were denied love and experienced physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. This left very deep, very complex, and very real wounds, leaving scars that are still being felt personally, socially, spiritually, and collectively.
In the time when our story started, we were able to parent in the cultural way that has seen our families survive and thrive for generations. Our people were strong, and our culture flowed and healed us in times of hurt.
But since the trauma of colonisation and the stolen generations, we have not been able to heal in the same way. And we have unknowingly passed this trauma on to our children through sharing our sad stories and having them witness and experience our pain. This is known as intergenerational trauma, and we see symptoms today in broken relationships, disconnected families, violence, suicide, and drug and alcohol abuse.
But this is not where our story ends. We still have strong minds and hearts, and we still know who we were and where we belong. By creating safe and strong communities together, supporting our families to be free from pain, returning to our culture and building a strength of identity, we can stop the cycle of trauma and bring about positive intergenerational change, so that we can continue to thrive for the next 60,000 years. There are simple things that we can all do to help heal our trauma.
Visit healingfoundation.org.au to find out more.
So I love that video, not just for its artistic style, but the way that it talks about trauma. And for us to understand that intergenerational trauma can mean a lot of things. It can mean a lot of different ways and spaces. It's not just for Aboriginal communities. It's not just for Native Americans. It's not just for African Americans or displaced people of the Black diaspora. It's to understand that there are many different areas of intergenerational trauma when it comes to adverse childhood experiences, that if we don't heal ourselves, we pass it on to our children. And that is where connectedness ends and where it does not necessarily thrive, where that connectedness is weak and does not make that connection in the best way possible. And I wanted to make this for a lot of different reasons, and I wanted to show this for a lot of different reasons, but more specifically to show, and especially at the Mercer Council on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction, we don't say that the opposite of sobriety is rehab or a drug facility. We say the opposite of the opposite of addiction is rehab or a drug facility. We say the opposite of addiction is connection. And now with this intergenerational trauma, it's to understand that there is a connectedness that needs to be fostered. There's a connectedness that needs to be honored. There's a conversation that needs to be had. There is a presence that needs to be honored as well. So we have references to this culture. We want to understand that. Now, when we're sort of understanding that too, there are many different ways they say that. And it's really just to go back to your roots, to understand what that means, and to understand why this community is a place where we can actually look to for examples. And that's why I chose the Aboriginals. Now, there were a couple of different ways that I thought was interesting. So we're going to use some data and empirical evidence here to understand what this means. Now, there was something called the Holodomor, and a lot of people may not have actually heard about this. And it was something that I really didn't know about until I did my research on the Soviet Union back when I was in college for my political science degree. And what I had found was that Joseph Stalin's regime actually and essentially the way that the story goes and what the reference that I'm looking at here is that he was a psychology student at Carleton University in Ottawa. And what he had found was that he was looking at a he was getting his doctorate in psychology. So he went to the Soviet Union just to study certain parts of post-war life and post-war conflict generations. And what he had found was that Bezos had references of Holodomor, which was the mass starvation of millions of Soviet Ukrainians from 1932 to 1933, considered to be an intentional homicide or intentional genocide orchestrated by Joseph Stalin's regime. Now, I'm going to be reading some numbers, and my apologies if it's too much to listen to with all these numbers, but I'm going to sort of surmise it at the end here, that he had followed a qualitative pilot study of 45 people from 3 generations of 15 Ukrainian families. This is not a lot, but it is a study to look through. Those who have lived through the Holodomor, their children and their grandchildren have been impacted by this, including risky health behaviors, anxiety and shame, food hoarding, overeating, authoritarian parenting styles, high emotional neediness on the parts of parents, and low community trust and cohesiveness, what many described living as in survival mode. Now, does that sound like an adverse childhood experience to you? Probably, because it is. Now, the Holodomor, those who immigrated in a group of Ukrainians unaffected by the event, the work is part of this sort of work is looking at the research and clinical work in psychology and related disciples. Now, what they had found is that there were actually related disciples here, and they did research for the intergenerational effects of many different areas, and they had found that they were akin to the intergenerational studies done for people who have survived the Khmer Rouge killings in Cambodia, the Rwandan genocide, the Holocaust, the displacement of Native Americans, the enslavement of African Americans, and the transgenerational effects are not just psychological. They are familial, they are social, they are cultural, they are neurobiological, and possibly, they're looking at this now, even genetic. Now, there were some studies done here that I found really interesting, and this was done at the University of California, which was led by an economist, Dora L. Costa, which did a study on the mortality and other Civil War era data of 700 Union Army prisoners of war and 2,500 of their children. So this is definitely more of a sizable thing. And this is also along with the data of 5,000 non-prisoner of war Union soldiers and 15,000 of their children. So this is definitely more reliable than the Soviet Union research, but it sort of found the same things. Now, what it had done here is that starting from the time, and this was basically the sons of these soldiers turned 45, they found that the sons of Union prisoners of war who had endured particularly harsh conditions while imprisoned died at younger ages than the son of prisoners of war who lived in camps under more favorable conditions than the other sons of non-prisoner of war soldiers. Now, this means a lot of different things, but what this can tell us, and this is just some preliminary data here, there's much more to this study that I haven't put in here just because it's so extensive, is to understand that if we do not heal our trauma, our children are affected by that trauma. And that is how we lose the connectedness between generations. And it also is to understand that the transmission, like the body is the transmission vehicle of a lot of our trauma. So the way that we interact, the way that we sort of neuralize a lot of our interactions, the neurobiological parts of this, the thinking, the brain matter, all of it is cohesive in raising children and understanding what that looks like. That does not mean if you have trauma, you're going to make your kids traumatized or give them a longer or shorter life sentence. But it does mean that when we are looking through data, it is to understand that if we work on our trauma, we are giving our children a fighting chance. And that is sort of what I want us to walk away with here. Also, this is a great resource, the Healing Foundation. It is Australian, but I highly recommend looking into it. They have done some great work with Aboriginals and helping people get back their identity after Australia was colonized. So, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. So if we're talking about immigration here, I do want to talk about this just because America was founded on immigration, and we all know this. Everyone has an ancestor who came from somewhere. And when we're sort of looking at this too, we want to talk about the dual language understanding. And immigration may be a word here, but it's also just code switching and identity within generations. You could be speaking the same language excuse me, and not understand what the other person is saying. And this is a very valid point for a lot of different reasons. Now, the reason why I say this and the reason why I bring this up is because immigration and the idea of wanting to stay culturally relevant sort of are out ahead here. So I know, for example, being of Peruvian descent myself, my dad is an immigrant from Peru, and I am someone who was raised in a Peruvian household, but also an American household. So there's definitely an interesting dynamic there. And actually, we're going to be exploring that more next week when we talk about Hispanic children. But when we're talking about this in particular, it's knowing that there is a difference between staying true to your roots of your family, whether that is an immigrant family or not, and wanting to sort of integrate yourself into a modern world. And for a lot of people, it's not both. For a lot of people, it's actually one or the other. And the reason why I bring this up is because Gen Z is actually the most racially and ethnically diverse ever in history of the United States. And there are some photos here for us to understand this as we're looking through. So nearly half of post-millennials are racial or ethnic minorities, which is cool. So post-millennials are more likely than millennials to live with a college-educated parent. So more post-millennials are pursuing college, but understand that there is a lot of ethnically diverse areas here. And it talks about Latino-borns as well, which is becoming the biggest majority or the bare majority. But to understand too that post-millennials are doing a lot of different things with their time, and they are the most ethnically diverse. And 48%, and this is something that I wanted to point out here, is that the research analyzed post-millennials, which we're talking about Gen Z here, are currently between the ages of 6 and 21, and they found nearly half, 48%, are from communities of color. So that is something exciting to explore as well. And I just want to make that clear while we explore that. Also to understand that code switching is a thing, and it is something that happens a lot among among children of parents who are immigrants, but it happens among any population that is sort of displaced or not as connected from their parent to the child. So code switching, we're going to talk about it for a second. What is it? Now, we can see here a lot of communities of color actually do a lot of code switching, and I talk more about code switching in another presentation, so I will link that below in case you're more interested in understanding this concept and phenomenon. But code switching in general is having one situation where you have one set of rules and one set of linguistics and colloquials, and all of a sudden switching in a matter of minutes or even seconds into another language and colloquials or linguistics. Now, this can mean that if you have communities of color, it can mean a African-American or someone who identifies as Black or from a community of color switching from one situation to another and using very different language. And that may seem like they're sounding white, they're sounding whatever. There are a lot of different interesting connotations to that. But understand that code switching is a thing, and it is not something that is going to go away, because code switching in a lot of ways is a form of survival for a lot of people. And we can say that on a smaller scale for people who are Gen Z, who may be interacting with someone who's a baby boomer or older. And it is because if you code switch, then it is giving information away that helps another person understand your intent and your perspective. And it is important for a lot of different reasons. For some people, it could be a form of survival. Now, code switching is definitely something that everyone does on an everyday basis, because you have a certain set of rules and expectations at your workplace than you do at your home at a pool party. But there are many different ways that people code switch, and immigration and being a child of an immigrant is just one of the most clear-cut ways to put that. But communities of color and generations who are younger, and the disparity between younger and older in general, can definitely be a code switch as well. And also understanding that I brought immigration in here too, because it talks about connectedness, and we'll be talking about this more next week. But essentially what this study had found, the Pew Research Institute had found, was that the longer a person, especially of Hispanic descent, because that was the study there, but this can talk about any immigration, was that the pride of that immigration or that connection to that immigrant lifestyle or that immigrant family falls away the longer that person or the longer those people stay in the country they are in. Now, this can mean good or bad things because they have assimilated to the culture, they have understood it, but it also means that they sort of may lose parts of their identity. And we're going to be playing more on that next week. So stay tuned for that presentation. I have two different things here, just because I feel that more people need to explore this than anything else. And I think that what we're really talking about here is that having conversations is the best part to keep connected to someone. And I just wanted to share, because I thought these two videos were very cute in particular, but having conversations can be a lot of different things. And these are just two examples of how people can connect older generations and younger generations. So this is a baby who is mesmerized by his grandpa's saxophone playing. So I love that video for a lot of different reasons, but what I find is that, oh, give me a second, I have to get through here. All right, exit out, just give me a second, my apologies. So what I find here is that, one, the child is adorable, but two, it's also that this conversation can be something that is fostered very young. It can be something as simple as, you like listening to the saxophone I play, here's how we can learn together. It is finding connection with that person that you want to have a connection with, who is younger or older than you, and having a conversation about it. It's finding ways that where there is commonality and common ground. It is working through all of that trauma and leading up to the point where that conversation can happen. And I just found it such a beautiful thing, because you can see the admiration on this child's face for his grandfather. And I always find it so interesting that there are so many different ways that people can have that conversation, right? So that was one way. And he was so young that maybe he didn't even know how to talk yet. He looks to be a little like over maybe 1 year old, not even. So, you know, that can be a great conversation starter as well. And also, I think what I find interesting is that, and I wanted to point this out, is that especially when we're talking about grandparents, we sort of talk about the connections that people can make between grandparent and child, right? And I put grandmothers talk to in the YouTube search results. And this is what I had come up with. And this is what I had found. So there was some spoken word here, talking with grandma, grandma's questions for her lesbian granddaughter, grandma B, go tell my mom, oh, sorry, not that one. Grandmas rate each other's grits, all of that stuff, right? But most of this stuff, if you look, is about food. It's about sharing culture. It's about stuff that may be interesting or hard to talk about. But once again, I just find it so interesting that food is one of the best ways to connect generations. So that was something that I wanted to share. And an example of that would be actually on Hi Ho Kids, one of my favorite YouTube channels. It is obviously parent approved, and it is something that I just find so wholesome. And these grandparents actually try their childhood favorites with their grandchildren. So I wanted to show you a quick snippet of that.
Hi.
Who are you two?
I am Clara, and this is my grandfather, Oni.
I'm Gigi's grandmother. She calls me Nini.
This is my Grandfather Preston.
Grandfather, thank you.
Gigi, what are you doing here with your grandma?
Let's think again.
We're gonna do homework?
No!
I'm here because Claire wanted me to bring something that my mother, Kay, had made for me when I was a little guy that I liked and I remembered.
What foods did you like to eat when you were my age?
When I was your age, I ate whatever my mama gave me.
You wouldn't believe it. We ate squirrels.
What?
Squirrels. My dad would shoot a squirrel, bring it home, fry it up, and we would have squirrel.
What? Did you bring squirrel?
No.
What did you bring?
Well, it has meat in it.
Should we bring it out?
Yep. Clara, open your eyes.
What's that?
That is a good old-fashioned Bisquick biscuit.
Wow. Yeah.
It's probably stuck. What is it?
I don't know. Bread. Biscuits and gravy.
How about a dumpling?
Open your eyes, Cavalli.
What do you call it?
It's a brunch loony sandwich.
Bunch.
Brunch.
Brunch. Loney.
Yeah, because, you know, we'd have breakfast, which would usually be cereal. And then before we went out to play, we'd take a little sandwich so we wouldn't have to come back for lunch.
So let's get to making this. Do I get the tiny bowl or the big bowl?
Which,
I want the big bowl.
of course, you want the big bowl.
Come back here, chicken. What is this stuff?
It's chicken and dumplings, and when I was little, I used to read cookbooks. And I read this recipe and I wanted to make it, and my mom said, only if your dad's not home because he doesn't like his food mixed up. So we made it one time when my dad was gone, and I loved it.
Can I have more chicken, please?
Now, this is what I made for myself. My mama didn't make this for me. When you put it on there, you take it, smash it down. Put the topping on there. Okay, then you mash it down.
When would you eat this?
You know, actually, this would be a kind of a good meal. This would be like maybe a Sunday, fancy meal, like fancy Sunday dinner.
Did you have to dress up for Sunday dinner?
That's funny. We had to dress for Sunday dinner. We didn't dress up.
Let's do this together. Me too.
So what I love about this video and what I find so intriguing about this video is that there's a younger generation here and there's an older generation here, but it's also that there's a story that they have behind this food, that there's a part of themselves, there's a gift that they're sharing with their grandchildren. And obviously this presentation is not just meant for grandchildren and grandparents to talk to each other. It's meant for anyone that feels disconnected to another generation, to open up pathways to have that conversation. And I just think food is one of the best ways that people can do that. And it is also a way that shares such an important part of that experience. And it inspires so many stories. My favorite one was when she was talking about Sunday dinner to her grandfather, and her grandfather just looks at her like, you know, amused and says, oh, we would dress up for Sunday. Well, we had to dress for Sunday. So I just find that so cute and interesting and exciting to see that there are so many ways that people can connect generations together, and food is definitely a part of that. So we're going to be moving on and moving forward. It's always the videos. Okay, here we go. So I sort of want to close on this because this presentation really is just about connecting. And I have both of these topics up here. And one quote is from Giorgio Armani. I hope I don't have to explain who that is. And he says, anyone who's passionate about what they do will have a better chance at connecting with future generations than those who simply follow transient trends. At least their work will have a distinct character. And this is what people respond to, I believe. Now, I think what this quote and what we can take from this quote is that if we are authentic with the way that we present information, if we give a altruistic effort, a valiant effort to connecting one person to another, to making sure that what we have to offer is so good and so authentic and so wholesome, that I don't think that anyone will snub their nose at it. I think that there will be so much that people have to say about the authenticity that we can offer with our experiences. Also, understand that, when we have that experience, it sort of is something like I said before, when you give that experience away, when you want to connect from one generation to the next, it is like you're giving a gift away, a piece of yourself, a piece of your past to another person, or a piece of your present to another person. And that in itself is such a gift, because that vulnerability cannot be faked. It cannot be anything in particular. It is just that. It is that vulnerability that connects one person to another. And I find that so exciting, so wholesome, and just honestly can help so much with mitigating so much of that, so much of the negativity that may happen out there. Also, this is the last quote that I wanted to end on. Deep under our feet, the earth holds its molten breath, while the bones of countless generations watch us and wait. And what I sort of want to end on here is that we are connected so much to each other. And obviously, we have differences, we have ways of life, we have hatred, we have dislike, we have all of those sorts of things. But it is also to understand that we are the culmination of billions of years of evolution. We are the culmination of so many things having to go right for us to be here. And I think that in our own right, when we look at the people of our past, when we look forward to the people of our future, it's understanding that because we are here now, and because we are the product of so much evolution and so much time and resource, and for everything having to have gone right for us to live, let's act like it. Let's act like we can connect with each other, like we are authentic with each other, so that we can be. So thank you for being here. And thank you for sharing this exact moment with me, because, everything had to coincide for you to be here. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So next week, we'll be talking about the Hispanic population and substance use disorders. So tune in for that, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you.